My intent is to offer some criticism of the status quo so that we can learn, and then perhaps in question period get into some solutions. Essentially, in my opinion, strong, secure, engage, the precursor to the current defense policy, delivered nothing substantive in terms of modern military equipment, which saw Canada, in fact, become weaker, more insecure, and essentially absent from the deployable stables of troops required for either United Nations missions or, of course, NATO. The 2024 defense policy update of Our North Strong and Free is no better, unfortunately, in that it promises some urgently needed equipment years from now, but nothing today. Indeed, the 2024 defense spend will be less than that of 2023. Of course, we're well aware of what just happened down in the United States. Both Republicans and Democrats are united and increasingly vocal about telling Canada how disappointed, frustrated, and fed up they are with Canada's failure to defend itself and their allies, with a special mention on the Arctic. Meanwhile, as we know, and I was involved in the last NAFTA renegotiations, that's coming due at a time when a variety of key players down south have articulated clearly the base of 3% perhaps looms on the horizon, and how defense, security, trade, and border security are all intertwined. At all this time, at this time of crisis internationally, with what's happening in the Middle East, in Ukraine, Canada's military readiness is at its lowest level in 50 years. Canada spent last year in 2023 more money on consultants and professional services than it did on the Army, Navy, and Air Force combined, which, quite frankly, is madness. The Army has over 50% of its vehicle fleets which are awaiting spare parts and technicians. The Navy is struggling mightily, bless them, to keep elderly warships, a handful of them at sea, specifically in the Indo-Pacific, and they're desperately short of trained sailors. And the Air Force has been unable to participate in significant NATO deterrent exercises either up north or out over the oceans in conjunction with our friends and allies, because they don't have the pilots, the spare parts, or the money to fly the aircraft. In the Arctic, which is many times larger than Europe, Canada has fewer than 300 military support staff who are not deterrent. They're essentially unarmed. Some of them are part-time, bless them, and about 1,600 Skidoo equipped with rifles, Canadian Rangers, who are not combatants. Their role is to observe and report. The bottom line is that Canada has no permanently assigned combat elements to deter potential presence by the Russians or the Chinese, who are showing up in our waters with increasing frequency, but other people do. Russia specifically has between 25 to 35,000 combat troops deployed in their Arctic, with huge amounts of operational equipment, air, land, and sea. The United States, bless them, has 22,000 full-time military and part-time military professionals, with more equipment than the entirety of the Canadian forces in terms of combat delivery. So really, thank you, America, for defending our Arctic. We are facing unprecedented dangers and challenges, and quite frankly, I see no sense of urgency to change, to modify, to re-guide the efforts of the government towards supporting and assisting the Canadian forces. Some facts. We have less than 35 military personnel deployed on UN missions. In 2003, we had close to 2,500. We are the only NATO nation whose level of military operational readiness is going down when everyone else is skyrocketing up. We have the longest and least efficient procurement system in NATO, indeed in any nation that I can find. We are the only nation in NATO that does not have a costed plan to get to 2% of GDP, which was first agreed to by a Minister of Defense in 2008 and reiterated in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and I could go on. We are the only NATO nation whose defense minister has publicly admitted that he could not convince his fellow cabinet members of the importance of NATO defense spending and the 2% GDP. And as mentioned already, we're the only NATO nation whose defense budget decreased this year. Mr. Chair, I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Bazan, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, General and Professor, for joining us here today. General Leslie, you were a Liberal member of Parliament. Did Prime Minister Trudeau or Minister Sagan ever come to you for advice on developing things like defense policy?
To answer the question and to put it in context, prior to the 2015 election, I was the co-chair along with Mark Garneau of the Liberal Policy Platform sessions, which focused on defense, security, and borders. And in that context, the Liberal Defense Platform of 2015, I was very pleased to have quite a say and influence on, and that on also on veterans policy.
Strong, secure, engaged. How much did they consult you?
There was some, but a lot of it was based on the work that had gone into defense policy platforms. The tragedy is,
when it comes down to delivery of what was in there, did they talk to you about how to get things done, how to buy the kit that we need?
no, I tried several times, not necessarily with the Prime Minister, but his interest in defense, as we all know, is not terribly high.
Okay, so when we talk about the Prime Minister, like you mentioned the National Defence Act and how the Minister is responsible for the leadership and operation and direction of the Canadian Armed Forces and serves at will of the Prime Minister, was that lack of accountability, that lack of oversight and responsibility due to the lack of interest by Prime Minister Trudeau?
I think it's fairly clear to say that the willingness of Cabinet until quite recently to pay attention to the details of defense and to do that which the professor suggests, which is trying to reduce the levels of bureaucracy while increasing accountability. Essentially, it's gone nowhere for the last 10 years because of their level of interest in defense and security issues, which is why we're in such, not big trouble, but which is why we're in such disrepute with our friends and allies in NATO and increasing disrepute down south because we promised to do something that would involve commitment of finances, and we have not followed through on that promise, and we're being held to account now.
So with the procurements that have taken place, and Professor Lagasse has clearly laid out what the government has purchased, and which us as the official opposition have been supportive of, has there been enough kinetic equipment purchased to ensure that we are able to defend Canada and participate in allied missions as required?
Absolutely, categorically not. And the focus has not been on kinetic equipment, things which harm people, keeping in mind the penultimate role of the Canadian Forces and the one which they prepare for is to engage in combat and fight and win the nation's wars alongside our friends and allies.
To buy to ensure that we're providing the equipment to protect Canada, like air defense, and what do we need to further complement our efforts in places like Latvia and elsewhere in NATO missions?
There is a list longer than my leg, because my arm's a bit gibbled right now, but that I could easily rattle off. But I would just say, simply put, the short-term things which are readily achievable within a matter of months, if we have the will, long-range precision strike rocket systems for the Army, new self-propelled guns, air defense, a real system that can actually reach out and touch past the short-range system we've currently acquired. So you need short range, medium range, further range, more drone capability and command and control architectures, new naval vessels, a ship contract would be nice, ammunition for the Army would be really nice.